Okay, so in this video we are going to have a look at bind function in JavaScript. So in JavaScript we have a bind function which is used to create a new function from a given function with the same body and scope as the given function, but a new binding for this. So essentially the bind function is used to change the binding of this variable, and it can bind arguments also, but that we'll see next. But right now let's just focus on the new binding of this. So for example, let's say we have created a function. So some function, let's say some function foo is created, and that in that foo function, let's say we are using this variable. So let's say return this dot val. Okay, and then we are calling this foo function, and obviously we'll get undefined. And why we are getting undefined? Because here, what is this? This is global, right? If you write this equal to global, then you will get true, right? Which means that on the global there is nothing called dot val, and that's why this thing is giving me undefined. However, if global or global this dot val, had I created some variable, let's say some value, let's say 20 in this dot val, then now I will get 20 instead of undefined. So you can see that now I'm getting 20. So that is fine. That is fine. But what if I want to attach this and later, let's say dynamically some other variable is used. So the point is that how can I how can I control this attachment of this? So right now it is giving this thing, but let's say I already have an object. So let's say I already have an object, something like this. It has val 50 or something, right? And I want to use this object as my this, right? So obviously this thing is not defined earlier. I am getting undefined. But before calling, before executing this foo function, I want to attach this object to this function, so that this variable points to this object rather than earlier whatever it was doing. Earlier it was doing to earlier it was getting the reference to the global variable, right? I don't want that. So in order to do that, you can customize that by calling this function called bind. And when you call something like foo.bind, and then you can pass something, you can pass any object, and that object is now attached to this variable inside foo. And understand that it is simply using bind will not work. You have to assign that to another variable. So let's say foo dot bind, and you pass this thing. You understand? Simply this will not work. You can see that still it is giving undefined. Simply this will not work because this does not change the foo function automatically, right? It, as we mentioned earlier, it creates a new function, and returns that new function, right? So essentially what you have to do is that you have to change this foo variable, so that now this new foo is equal to this bound foo, the foo which has bounded this object to this variable. Okay, and now if you run, then you see that you get 50, or for that matter, as in the example in the slide, if it is 10, then you will get 10. But whatever the object you are attaching, that is now acting as this, not the define earlier global one or something, right? And that's why it will get, when you call it will get 10. So it is fine. One more important thing is that the bind only works once, which means that let's say you do something like this, and let's say again you do something like 50 or something, right? It does not matter. Whatever is the first time you did, first time you bound 100 or 10, that is the only thing. If you bind something again and again, then it does not work, right? And it is about see, uh, so you can understand this thing, that if I don't assign this, then it is working or not. Then you see that then it is working. Why? Because this foo has no bound, has nothing bound till now, right? This foo has nothing bound till now. Actually, you can understand that when I do something like foo is equal to, then now this foo has already bound this thing, and now here I'm again trying to bind, then this will fail, right? But if I don't do that, you can understand something like this only, then I bound it, new function is created, but that new function I have not used, that is thrown away because I have not saved it anywhere, right? Again here I am binding, but that is not used, right? So you can again that multiple binding is happening, but once you have captured that variable, that yeah, this is the thing which I am going to finally bound where function is this thing, then after that if you do something like any more binding, then it will not work. You see that this is only working, right? So just a caveat, nothing else, that bind only works once. So for example, you do this and then again you bind, then that will fail. Let's revisit what we earlier learned about this, because that will be used here. So let's revise that. We saw that if inside a function we use strict mode, then this variable will point to undefined, and if it is not strict mode, then it used to point a global variable. So a window in browser environment, and global object in Node.js environment. Okay, so that was the case, but right now you can see that I have used strict mode, and that's why this is undefined. And so let's see here. So let's say I'm using strict mode, right? And yeah, and this will be undefined, so undefined dot will fail. So let's just simply have undefined. And now I'm thinking that yeah, when I'm calling foo, then it will be undefined. If it would not have been strict mode, then you can see that it was global. That is fine. We are interested in strict mode only. So it is undefined. But what if okay, one more thing. So we know that like window has any function, let's say window dot foo, then I can call it simply as foo also, because any attribute which is attached to window or global object for that matter, anything that can be called directly also. So let's see that example here also. So let's say I attach this foo function to something called bar in this global this. So global this dot bar is equal to foo. Let's say I attach this. Then what will happen? Obviously, I can call global this dot bar, but since this is a global variable, so in the case of global this in the browser or here, in both cases, what will happen is that I can directly call bar also. I can directly call bar also, and you can see that this also works. It will not give that undefined bar is undefined or something. It will not give, because on global you have defined it, but still its value is undefined, and that is fine, because this bar is invoked from a global context. So this is also undefined. But if I invoke global this dot bar, so you can understand, if I invoke global this dot bar, then you can see that it is not undefined. It is actually, you can see that it is a global object. So if you want to prove it, you just print it equal to global, right? And you are getting true, which means that this thing is returning global, which means that this variable here is global. Okay, now why is this happening? So you can see here also that what I was trying to say, that if you simply call foo, if you simply call bar, in both cases it is undefined because of global context. In case of global this dot bar, it is giving us global thing, right? Why? Because again you see that how this bar is called. This bar is not called directly in global context. This bar is called as in the context of global this object. Now global this object dot bar, which means that inside bar this will be global this, and that's why inside bar, now bar is like the same as foo. So inside foo, so when you call bar, actually foo will be called. But even if it is strict mode, the this variable is global this. Why? Because this strict mode behavior, that it is undefined or something, that is only for the global context. In global context, if you are using a function and that is strict mode, then it is undefined. In global context, if you are using and that is not a strict mode, then it is global object, right? But if it is not global context, it is some context like this, then I don't care what is your context, whatever is the context. In this context, the global, this is only the context, but whatever is the context, that thing becomes this. And that's why here when you return, then global this is returned. Global this is essentially same as global, or it will be window in the browser environment, right? So this is a small revision of this. Now let's see that how we can introduce bind in this context. So same thing, foo is there, this thing is there, but now rather than simply doing global this dot bar is equal to foo, directly doing this now, so you can understand that in this case you are seeing that it was undefined and this time it was giving us a global object, right? Now instead of this, let's say I do something like this, where I am not directly assigning foo, rather I am binding some this to this variable, to this function foo, and then returning this. And what I want to attach? I want to attach this global this itself, which means that if I do foo dot bind and then I attach global this, so you understand, foo dot bind and attach global this, which means that now this bar function has attached this as global this, which means that now not only this but even this second one. So first one will be still obviously it will be undefined, right? Why? Because because it is unchanged as in the previous case, right? But right now when we are calling bar, even if we are calling bar in global context, but we have already attached some this. You understand? This function is same as global this dot bar is same as this bar, that is fine. But to this function we have attached, we have assigned a function which has a inbuilt attached this, which is global this. And that's why earlier it was undefined, but now since I have specifically attached some this, and that's why when I call this, then this is going to be global. So you can understand that if you want to prove that this is global, you can see that this is global, right? And you see true, which means this is global, and obviously this will be also global, right? And the behavior will be same in browser also, just that instead of global you will compare with, it will return window object, and rest everything will be same. Okay, so now you can understand that what is the advantage of bind in these cases. Okay, so now you can see that both of them will attach, will return global or window, because the global this is already attached at the time of creating this global variable, global attribute bar function. Okay, now let's see this example. We have an object, we have some val 10 at some key value pair val 10, that is fine. The foo is another key, which is a function, which is a function return this dot val. Okay, okay, so that is fine. Now if we call something like object dot foo, then what will happen? What is the context of this foo execution? Obj. Okay, so when this function is executing, this will be obj, and this dot val will be obj dot val. What is obj dot val? 10, and that's why 10 will be printed. Fair enough. Now let's change this thing. We earlier saw that if we assign something like obj dot foo is equal to bar, and then we call bar, then that was not the behavior which we saw earlier also, right? And that was because now this bar is called from global context. Since this is called from global context, right, then this is now global this, right? This is now global this, which means that since this is global this, and that's why on that val is not defined. Val is defined on just this object, right? Not some global object, and that's why this will return undefined. That is fine. But what is the solution of this? Let's say we still want to capture it in a separate variable and call it like this, but we want our this still to be this obj, right? Rather than this global something, right? Again, bind can help us, right? So what we can do, is that instead of directly calling bar, earlier what we did, earlier we simply called bar, obj.foo is equal to bar, and simply we called bar. Now before calling bar, let's say we bind obj. So bar dot bind obj. Now we have bound obj, which means that now if we call bar, then this variable inside, wherever this function will be executed, inside this function execution context, this will be attached to obj, which means that bar is essentially this only, this function only. This function will be called, and this will be now obj. So even if it is called like this, now it is this dot val will be obj dot val, and obj dot val is 10, and that's why we will still get 10 in this case, and that is because we are successfully able to use bind in this case. Okay, so this is all about binding this variable. There is one more use of bind function, that is used for binding arguments also. Okay, so let's say there is a function, foo. So let's reuse this function only, but it has some arguments. Let's say it has some arguments a, b, and we want to return a plus b, or for that matter sum. But let's take that rather than returning, just print something, so that will be fine also. So const sum is equal to a plus b, that is the sum, and let's console log everything. We want to console log a, b, we want to console log a, b, and sum everything, right? And now let's call simply foo with something, let's say 5, 10 or whatever. Then if we run this, then we will get 5, 10, 15. Let's have just a colon here to clarify that these left side things are the passed arguments, and the right one is the actual sum. So 5, 10, 15. Yeah, so this is the function. Now if we call 2, 3, then obviously the a and b are 2 and 3 respectively, and sum is 5. That is fine. Now actually you can do something like this, that rather than passing variable, rather than passing arguments directly in foo, you could already bind a function which has already arguments attached to it, and after that if you simply call it without arguments, then also arguments will be passed. You understand, something like this. So the first one we already said that earlier we were passing null, earlier we were passing some this, right? Now we are passing null. So you can understand that null we are passing because we don't want to, we are not interested in this attaching this or something. We are just interested in this example for attaching arguments rather than this, and that's why we are passing null. But actually null is not as simple as that. If you pass null, then nothing happens. No null, no this binding is happening. It is slightly nuanced, which we'll see next. But for right now, just pass null so that it doesn't matter, right? Let's say foo is equal to foo dot bind, and I don't bother about this right now. I'm just bothering about the arguments. So let's say, yeah, same thing. Let's say 5, 10 we are passing here, right? Now once I have done, so in this case the binding is already done. This 5, 10 is already bound to this foo. So after that, even if I simply call foo without any arguments, then also you'll see the same behavior, 5, 10, 15. So when I'm calling foo, it is running this, and 2 arguments are already attached to it, and that's why a and b are 5 and 10 automatically when I execute only foo, right? And then the answer is exactly the same. Okay, but what if I do something like this? I pass only one variable, let's say 5. Then obviously it needs 2 variables. I have only used, so you understand that the first one is used for this. Right now we are not interested in that. After the first one, all the arguments, so let's say many arguments you can pass, right? Whatever you pass, they will go as the arguments, they will be attached as the arguments starting from the beginning of the foo functions. So all the arguments are starting from the left, they will be counted from here. Now if you see, then you are saying that only 5 I have passed. So as expected, b should be undefined, a should be 5, and that's why you will get something like this. A is 5 but b is undefined, right? And that's why 5 plus undefined is 9. That is fine. And again that is, you are passing one less. If you pass one more also, so let's say 5, 10, 30 or whatever, then again a will be 5 B will be 10, and C, if C would have been there, then that C would have been 30, but you are not using C, just two arguments you are using. So if you are using two parameters and you are passing three arguments, like attaching three arguments, then it is like it does not make any sense, right? And that's why after 2 everything will be ignored by JavaScript. That is fine, but that is fine, others are ignored. But we were more interested in, is there a way that I want to attach 1 here, you can understand, I want to attach 1 here, and I want to again pass like again pass one more thing, right? How can I do that? That turns out that, you see, bind you cannot do more than once, right? So once you bound, then bind only works once, so that is fine. But after binding, actually you can pass things here also. Actually, if you pass here, then whatever the arguments you have already attached, after that whatever the remaining arguments are there, that can be passed here also. So you can understand that this will also work. You understand, whatever you are passing here, that is being taken as the second argument. And if you don't pass anything, then now this will become the first argument, and then it will be like second argument is now missing, right? So now if you pass something like 20 10, then it will be 20 plus 10. That is fine, right? And again, if you pass everything from here, right, then whatever you are passing here doesn't matter. Whatever you are passing here doesn't matter, everything will be ignored, because first argument is, and whatever you pass here, that will be also ignored. You can understand, right? So this will be only used when here sufficient number of arguments are not passed and the rest of the arguments can be passed here. Okay, so that is fine. So we can see that 2 is there, 5 is there, then it is working fine. And if extra arguments you are passing, then that will be ignored. We already saw that. Okay, so let's see that behavior which we were earlier seeing, that if no arguments are provided, so you can understand that you could have done something like this also. So let's say 10 20, that is fine. Like right now we are more interested in only this thing. So I'm saying that, let's say yeah, let's say I don't do anything, then obviously 10 20 30. What if I do foo.bind and I don't pass anything, right? So we are considering situations where I don't pass anything, or I pass undefined, or I pass null. What happens in these scenarios? We are trying to understand that. Okay, so as you can see that in this case we are not using this, so it does not make any sense. We can't see what is happening with this, but let's see that in detail. So if no arguments are passed provided to bind, then or if this argument is null or undefined, which means that if I don't pass anything, or if it is null or undefined, in all these cases, this of the executing scope is treated as this argument of the new function. Executing scope. Okay, so right now you see that executing scope is global, right? So if I print this, then the executing scope is global, so this should be global, and that's why if you print this is equal to global, then it is printing true. Okay, but the point is that, yeah, if I don't do anything, then also it was global, right? So what is the difference? Let's see an example in the case of use strict. So we know that this thing is true right now, but as soon as I use strict, then it will be false, because this is now undefined, right? So let's see that this is undefined, right? Now if I do this thing, right, then you see that now it is attached to null. Okay, so now this is attaching to null. Okay, so in a strict mode, whatever you are passing here, you can see that if you are passing undefined, then it is becoming undefined. If you are not doing anything, then it is still undefined, right? And if you are passing null, this is null. That is fine. But in case of non-use strict mode, obviously that in both cases, whether you pass null or not pass anything or not do anything at all, in all cases we can see that this is global. But let's take an example. So let's see, this thing is there, which we saw earlier also, val10 and the sum function, and object.foo is equal to object.foo.bind null. Okay, so yeah, so this is a better example. Why? Because right now when we are executing object.foo, then the context in which foo is executing, right, it is what, it is this original, it should be this original object, right? But right now I am binding it to null, which means that now it should become global. So let's see that. So instead of having this function directly, let's have an object. So instead of this, let's write some this dot val or something. So now we don't need this many things, so let's just print this dot val, that should be sufficient. But rather than doing this, I am trying to have some object, and inside that we are trying to have, right? So inside that object we already have some val, which is, let's say, 10, 20, whatever, and then we want to have key value pair foo, right? Something like this. Okay, and now a and b is not needed, so this is fine. And now I'm trying to run obj.foo. Console log is not needed because it is already there inside obj. So obj.foo we are calling, then you will get 20. That is fine, because what is the context in which foo is running? Obj. Obj is the context, and that's why inside foo this will be obj, and that's why this dot val is essentially obj.val, and obj.val is 20, and that's why it is printed. That is fine, as expected. But now I am saying that let's change this obj.foo to obj.foo.bind. And now see, now obviously if you bind some specific thing, val 30, then there is no doubt that now your val will be 30. 30. We are not trying to understand it. We are trying to understand what happens when we don't pass anything, you see, or we pass null. You see, it is becoming undefined, which means that somehow this is not now obj. Let's print that. What is that? This. And if we print that this, then we will see that it is global, right? So if you print this and compare this to global, then you can see that, yeah, it is undefined. This dot val is returning printing undefined, because essentially this is global. If you pass undefined, then also see it is global. If you don't do anything, if you don't pass anything, sorry, then also it is global. So you can see that if I don't pass anything, then it is global. But had I not done anything, right, then this was obj, and that's why this was not global, this was obj, and that's why it is false, and this dot val is 20. You understand? But even if you do something like this, even if you don't pass anything, or so not pass anything, passing undefined, passing null, all are same. They will bind it to the context in which you are calling. The context in which you are calling, which means that the whole execution context. So the execution context of this whole thing is like this environment. So you can understand that this environment is what? This environment is global environment, right? So that's why this inside this is equal to global. Okay, that is fine. So let's see one more example. Val 10, this dot val 10 a dot b. So in this case we are using a, b as the passed arguments, and also we are using this dot val. That is the case. Now we are using obj dot foo is equal to obj dot foo dot bind. If this would not have happened, then it would be what? It would be like this dot val will be 10, right? And then whatever you are passing, that is fine. But now if I have done something like this, then if I am not passing anything, then arguments 3 and 5 are already attached, so that is fine. So a and b are 3 and 5, that is fine. But now this becomes global because I am passing null and my execution context is here. So so this is becoming null, sorry, this is becoming global, and that's why global.val is not available. Obj.val is available, global.val is not available, that's why it will be undefined 3 5, and the answer will be obviously summation will be null, not a number. That is fine. But if we do something like this, where you can see that obj.foo.bind, and then I attach obj, so I know that if I see, I have to use this argument somehow, right? So you might understand that earlier it was already obj. Why I need to attach obj? The point is that if you simply want to call obj.foo 3 5, then, and you don't need this line at all, then there is no need of doing this. Obj.foo 3 5 automatically, like its context will be obj, and that's why this will be obj, and 3 5 you are passing, that is all. But since you are binding arguments, and the binding argument syntax is that the first argument is this, and then arguments you are passing, so now you are concerned with that 3 5 we have passed, this arguments I have attached, but what should be the first argument? The first argument, if you provide null or something, then we know that the behavior is that now this will become global, and that's why you have to again bind the same obj again, and then the behavior will be as expected. So now 10 3 5 and 18, that is the expected answer. And again, not to say that you could have used your own custom object also in this case, and in this case if this is this object, then this will be taken from this dot val will be taken from this object, and it will be 23 5 and 28. That is fine. So that will be all for bind. In the next video we will see some other topic.